Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. All but about 10 minutes of the MLQ regular season are now in the books, and we're here to break it all down, both this weekend's events and in a South-centric episode. We will also be talking about last week's South Super Series and really the whole division as a whole to recap the regular season. We're also lucky to have Mcbride on the program with us for an interview a little bit later. But in the meantime, I'm Ethan Sturm. I've got Nick Jablonski and Jack McGovern with me. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing well.
We'll start as always with one burning question. And my burning question maybe is a slightly hot take, maybe it's not. I guess you guys can decide. Is there a semifinalist in this division other than Austin? Jack, take it.
I don't think so. I think depending on the way the bracket falls, if a team is playing the way that San Antonio tries to goad their opponents into playing, and a team gets really overextended in the beating game and leaves themselves open to a lot of transition opportunities, I think the Soldados could find their way into the semis, but otherwise, I think there's too much strength in the East Division, particularly, and I think even some of the North matchups could be tricky for the Soldados in the first round.
Nick, how about your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, are we assuming that Minneapolis can catch a snitch at this point? Because if Jay is doing what Jay is doing this whole weekend, we're going to see that plus 30 advantage, assuming if Minneapolis chooses the San Antonio slot here. With that the case, and if Miguel is not injured, then it's going to be a hard-fought battle, and it's going to be a really fun game to watch. I mean, I'm super excited for that matchup. If that is the matchup in this case, we don't know it yet. But that could go either way. I would also lean no, but I don't necessarily think that it's a 100% chance now.
Yeah, and I mean, also, Austin's not really getting probably the quarterfinal they deserve as, the number one seed out of one of the two stronger divisions. At this point, the most likely scenarios are that whoever loses on Saturday, be it Washington or Boston, and becomes the third place team in the East Division, will probably end up playing Austin in that quarterfinal, which, I mean, Austin's not a team that's going to shy away from anybody. They've won 3 MLQ championships. They're the defending champions. But still, it's not really the quarterfinal you're looking for when you earn this, like, oh, I get to go directly to the quarterfinals and I get to play a team coming from the play-in and avoid all the other teams that made it. So, so it'll definitely be interesting to see how that all comes along. But yeah, let's get into it. We'll start by talking about this week's series. It was a big series. I had laid out all the scenarios last week in AQD. But yeah, I mean, League City could go anywhere from being 5th to being 2nd. San Antonio could have been 2nd, or they could have been 4th. New Orleans could have been in, or they could have been out. When all the dust settled, the Soldados in one blowout in 2 games, I think a lot of people were closer than a lot of people thought they were going to be, did complete the sweep, did eliminate League City, did take the 2nd seed, and by virtue of that, pushed New Orleans into the 4th seed. The New Orleans curse finally returning to MLQ Championship, something that Nick, a former curse player, is very, very, very excited about, a thing that logistically MLQ admins worry about just because they're also such a great volunteering core for MLQ Championships. But I'm excited to see them. But let's talk about the series first, and we'll get to the curse a little bit later. The Soldados, as we said, not exactly doing it in dominant ways, at least in games 2 and 3. Nick, what do you think went wrong for them in that aspect?
I think that they got a little bit out of their own element. The Soldados team is a transition-oriented team. A lot of the veterans on this team made their living in the past in transition, and they started playing. Once Miguel Esparza went out with injury, they started slowing the game down. And that led to some benefits for our guests later. Mcbride looked electric in the half court, looked awesome taking her space and moving with the ball and without the ball in her hands. but everyone else kind of looked a little bit stuck in the mud in half court. I know Jack's going to call out one person in particular later on who maybe didn't, but as a whole, they looked like a team without many half court ideas. And I think that really playing into the half court really hurt them.
Jack, what red flags do you think kind of were holding up San Antonio at some point down the stretch of the series?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to overstate how important Miguel Esparza is for what the Soldados are trying to do. So when he went down, they really had to figure out how to score and what their identity is. And over the course of the season, I think they've found at times that they can really look to Jay Stewart playing off the ball much harder when Esparza isn't feeding him. But Stewart, I think, had a great week, both playing for the developmental academy and then taking the pitch with the Soldados. Just really beating guys one-on-one in the half court, opposing players, and making a difference when his team needed him. So yeah, I was impressed.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we've talked about Jay a decent amount this summer already. And, just the amount of steps he's taken over the course of one summer really looks like a completely different player than he did the last college season. He plays off Miguel when Miguel is healthy and on the field so extremely well, playing behind the hoops there. Was able to do a little bit more in this series with Esparza out for a lot of it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to continue to see him grow. And I mean, the Seeking game that you mentioned, he gets a catch. Eric Reyes also gets a catch this weekend. Both of them have had multiple catches this season. They finished the season tied with New York for the most snitch catches on the year. Nick, when you have this combination of kind of more agile athletic seeker and kind of a size seeker, and then you've also got the beating game that they do, you're going to get results. What have you been seeing from them in that regard?
I am seeing a much smarter Jay Stewart in the seeker game. I mean, it can be argued that his attempt to catch that snitch in the Rutgers game at USQ Nationals that pushed the snitch all the way over to Rutgers may have cost San Antonio that game. And we're not seeing that anymore. We are seeing quick engages. We are seeing disengages when the other team seeker is nearby. We are seeing aggressive moves rather than attempting to take time to set up, which is super valuable. And their beating core is what it is. I mean, we saw a little bit of a slip up from it this weekend in the snitch on pitch game, but given the talent that's there throughout the beating core and the experience in snitch on pitch scenarios, it shows in this with them having a tie for the best record in the league.
Yeah, for sure. Jack, I think another red flag that I've been seeing, and we've talked about before on the show, it is just kind of the lack of physicality across the board on this team. And when you kind of want to look at one of the reasons League City was hanging in these games 2 and 3 is that basically any time there was chaos in the beater game, not even they weren't losing in the beating game hard ever, basically the whole series. But anytime there was chaos, this team just couldn't find the one hit. And like for all the things that Miguel brings to his team, is because we're mentioning he's coming off. I mean, physicality is not something he's adding. That's not what disappeared with that. So what do you think this team could or needs to do in that aspect coming to championships?
Yeah, what League City was trying to do was pretty simple. They were trying to clear out the opposing beaters, even against two bludgers, and trying to drive through with players like John White and Hidden Boys. They were trying to create no bludgers opportunities because they felt confident in their ability to get through those tackles. And the Soldados in the weeks leading up to MLQ Championship, I expect we'll be looking at the film and thinking about how they can improve just with wraps and slowing down opposing players. It's hard to teach perfect tackling form in the last few weeks of the season, and they might not have the personnel, but what you can do is just figure out some ways to slow down drivers, and I think the Soldados can do that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes back to a key point, because it feels like every time we've talked about this team in, when the results maybe aren't going where we might have expected them to coming into the season. The Kansas City sweep, we said, of course, like Daniel Williams wasn't there, as well as a few of their other beaters, like Chris De La Fuente and Baltimore Nunez also weren't there that weekend. And this week, we're talking about Miguel not being there injured for the second two games, but at some point, you are what the rest of your team is, and it's something we've been talking about in Quidditch for a long time. It's if one or two players are absent, that can be a big problem if that's affecting your team greatly. They need some other step ups. David Avila is a player we've mentioned at times. I thought he had kind of a quiet series this weekend. He's a player that's going to step up. Dylan Freeman, Nick, we're taking a look at as well this weekend. That's somebody who does have the size and some of the physicality that maybe this team's lacked at times. So there are players in the roster, but Nick, do you think they're going to be able to get enough out of them come championship time?
I mean, I think when your first matchup is either Rochester or Minneapolis, correct? You're going to see physicality on the other side of the ball, whether it's the driving forces of Minneapolis or the tackling that we see coming out of Rochester. And maybe that doesn't matter if they can't catch Miguel. But, I mean, if the rest of the team is going to be trying to make one or two moves around these players, I don't think we're going to see I think we're going to see them struggle against the physicality regardless. I think those are going to be really good games, and I think they're going to be close because even without the physicality, the synchronicity of their top beater lines is so strong that they're covering up for a lot of it. We're seeing a lot of beats just around hoops because the beaters have to do that because they're getting to hoops. But if they come across this and they have to play a 3-game series where all they're doing is taking hits, whether on the defensive end or the offensive end, we could see this team wear down pretty quickly. Yeah.
And I do think it's worth at least mentioning before we move on to San Antonio, just kind of the kind of unprecedented nature of what Miguel Esparza and Daniel Williams and Jay Stewart kind of had to do, being at a camp with 2 days all week, then playing 4 games in the really hot and humid Charlotte sun, and then less than 24 hours later flying across the country and playing this series as well. Not to say that these players aren't up to that kind of thing, but when they're kind of going that hard for that long, maybe they didn't have it, and now they have time to settle down, rest, and prep for championships. Like we said, though, it wasn't just San Antonio allowing League City to be in these games. League City definitely fought in these second 2 games, and that's kind of been consistent of what we've seen from this League City team all season, which is basically better every time we see them. Jack, what kind of stood out to you about League City's play this weekend?
Yeah, the beating was good in the second and third games, especially that they rose to the occasion, learned from some of their mistakes in game 1. I thought Connor Mason especially was making plays all over the field, really stepped up. But overall, just a strong effort from the Legends beating core to go toe-to-toe with what has been a vaunted San Antonio core.
Yeah, Nick, what did you see in terms of the beater play and how League City was able to kind of create some parity for large chunks of multiple games?
I think the opposite of what we saw when we talked about with San Antonio wanting to get out in transition. League City was the opposite. They want to set up. They want to make their engages in the moments when they feel most comfortable doing them, which in their case was the half court. And they took advantage, the Quaffle court took advantage of San Antonio's lack of physicality, which kind of made it seem, I don't want to say it's 2 years ago Quidditch, but it's kind of, I guess now that would be 2022, 3 years ago Quidditch, but it's a little bit of 3-4 years ago kind of style, right? Where you're waiting for the no bludger scenarios and then you're driving. And we sort of saw that disappear a little bit with two-handed tackling, but it kind of made it back this weekend. And that allows, when that's the case, and you're forcing the beaters to work as hard as they have to with this lack of physicality from San Antonio, it's going to make your job as the League City beaters a lot easier. And they took advantage of that this weekend, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like we said, it does feel like styles tend to be always revolving circle here in Quidditch. And I also think just because me and you during the USQCs are so focused on the college game, I do think there is more of that waiting for no bloods are still in the club game, then maybe you're giving it credit for. But it is good to see this team settling into ways that they can play against these teams. They found good ways to play against Kansas City. They found a way that works for them against League City after really getting completely blown off the rails in the first game. Jack, we were very high on Hayden Boyce coming into the season. Another solid performance from him. How would you grade kind of his performance compared to what you were hoping to see from him this season?
Yeah, I think last season at MLQ Championships, he really stood out as a methodical operator in the half court in those play-in games, really putting the legends on his back. In this series, he was kind of that electric player in transition that was providing the energy that League City really needed to carry them through the hot Texas heat. It was an energizer role. And I think he filled it well. I love watching him play, and he'll be missed at championships for sure.
Nick, other than Hayden, who do you think has stepped up to some degree in the Quaffle game for this team?
John White definitely jumped off the page. Very physical driver, really, really good physicality and taking advantage of those no bludger opportunities the beaters for. But we also talked about Chris Dorsey a lot at the beginning of the season, another member of that Sam Houston Quaffle Corps. Hasn't really been on the front page of this Legends team this year, but this series really stepped up. Really great job being composed with the ball in his hands. And then also a thing that I don't think you necessarily touched on enough, Jack, with Hayden was catching the ball in the back of the 2-2 Soldado zone and making them pay a lot from that position. And a lot of that is because of the composure of Chris Dorsey getting the ball on the wings and then finding Hayden from sort of that deadly angle against the 2-2 rather than the lofted flip over the top. It was a sharp pass to Hayden in the back. And that's something that can't go understated, especially against these 2-2 zones that are so well drilled at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And, obviously this League City team is super young. We talked, I don't remember if I was talking to you guys or someone else when the game was live. And we were like, oh yeah, so many of these San Antonio players used to play for League City. League City's seen a lot of players, move basically west in Texas. I mean, JJ, don't forget, played his first ever MLQ season with League City. This is nothing new. This kind of push across. So it's kind of great to see Ashton Jean Lewis taking a young program, kind of developing, seeing progress every week. We've talked about this with some of our other younger programs that weren't ready to compete for a championship yet this year, but it's the takeaways and kind of the growth week to week that really makes the difference on what we can hope to see for them going into next season. And hopefully a lot of them will be returning. Last question before we bring on our interview for the night. I just want to get your guys' opinion. If you're Minneapolis, is there any of the three East teams? I guess there's only two you can have, Washington or Boston, that you would be picking. No, sorry, Washington or New York. Washington or New York are the two that you could end up with. Would you pick either one instead of San Antonio? Jack.
It's a good question. I think I said no a couple weeks ago, but now I'm sort of thinking that maybe they should take their chances on New York. I think they do want to avoid San Antonio. I think Rochester is the tougher matchup for San Antonio with the physicality that they bring on both sides of the ball. And that's not to say the Monarchs can't, but I think they might be a little better suited, maybe playing against the Titans, just because the Soldados can really hit you on the fast break, and that's what proved the undoing of the Monarchs last year when the beater game kind of sped up, and the patient or more methodical half-court approach that Minneapolis had been relying on in the North Division could no longer get the results that they wanted.
All right, Nick, what do you think?
I think Cody Narveson and Gracie Johnson are watching the film and saying, we can dominate this team. right? I think they can go toe-to-toe with Daniel Williams and Kat Hayworth, and I think they think that with their methodical play style, they can slow down the game enough. I mean, if Cody Narvison and Gracie Johnson are catching everything thrown at them throughout this game, then that beater advantage kind of disappears regardless. Even if there is a beater advantage at this point, we'll have to wait and see. But I think that if the opportunities from New York and Boston would allow them to, they're too variable of a team. We've seen so many different looks from them this year. Whereas San Antonio has kind of been this, we have a transition plan. And they might change that for championships. But if they don't, I think it's an easier team to game plan for. And Minneapolis is a team that loves to game plan.
Yeah, I'm going to side with Nick for similar reasons, but also different reasons. I still think that Daniel and Kat will eat, but I think that Minneapolis will eat anytime they're not on the field. And I think that balance should be enough to kind of shift things and allow Minneapolis to be competitive. Also, I just think New York has so many players, and Washington, to that matter, that have been there before, right? And I'm not saying San Antonio doesn't have any. I mean, a lot of these players literally just won a USQ championship, but we've talked about so many names over the course of talking about the San Antonio team that, while they've maybe been on teams that have been deep in tournaments, they haven't been, the player heavily relied on. And, when we talk about some of those younger UTSA players, Daniel, when he's with Heat, there's so many great beaters around him. This is his tournament. If they're going to go far in this tournament, he's going to have to absolutely dominate this tournament. So I think it's people in different shoes, whereas, New York, John Jackson, Lindsey Morel, they've been here before. Washington, their entire first line, they've been here before. So I think that's the reason I'd probably favor San Antonio. All right, let's get to our interview, though, who we're very excited to have, chaser for the Soldados, Mel Kite. Mel, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Can y'all hear me? Sorry.
We can. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I just kind of want to ask as a general overview. I mean, it's kind of been an up and down season for the Soldados. You guys have had some really good sweeps. You've had some really rough losses. You've had some blowouts. You've had some games that were tighter than probably they should have been. How's that kind of been, on the interior of the team, just kind of, staying with it, keeping heads up, etc.?
Well, we have a fresh new team from last year, pretty much. We have a lot of young talent from UTSA and Texas State on the team. And, we're taking everything as a learning experience and learning from our mistakes and figuring out what works for us, maybe a little bit later than we should, but I think we're getting there. And I think we're going to show y'all something fun at champs.
Awesome. You mentioned the young portions of your team, and you have a giant number of UTSA players specifically. I want to say like 10 of your 30 or maybe slightly less than that. Can you kind of highlight their growth through the season and maybe shout out some players, either, the ones that we have talked a lot about, or even some maybe that we haven't as much that you've really seen grow a lot?
Yeah, y'all talk about Jay all the time. He's great. He developed so much just over this past weekend at the DA camp, and it was great to see him come out and, give everything he had after him, Daniel, and Miguel were playing hard all week. So that was great. I think Matt Blackwood also has really been stepping it up. Doesn't get a lot of love on the pod, but he's been working really hard. He has been doing a great job at taking over, being our person who, like, a good hitter. We don't have a lot of size this year, and I think he's making up for that. He's doing really good. Oh my gosh, so much to talk about. Sleeper Cell from this weekend, Brandy from Texas State. I think she's a great beater. She didn't get to chase, but she chases as well. And it was great to see her out there this weekend too.
Awesome. So for you personally, I mean, when things got tough, both in games 2 and 3, you really started taking over the game. What were you kind of seeing in the League City defense that you were just able to constantly kind of find those gaps and those holes to just kind of absolutely pick them apart?
Jay and Matt drew a lot of attention away from me, so it was really easy to just slide in on that empty side and get a quick jump in the hoop. And, Matt and Jay trust me enough to just kind of chunk me the ball and hope that I'll catch it. And that just worked out in our favor.
For sure. Nick, you can take the next one.
Yeah, you talk a lot about catch and finish, Mel, but you were taking the lane a lot and shooting the ball from distance, and that's not something you're new to. But it's you do way more than just catch the ball and put it through the hoop. Can you sort of talk about how you developed that through your time? Because it's a skill set that we laud a lot of players for, but you are definitely one of the elites in that scenario of shooting from that side.
Thank you, Nick. Oh, that was so nice. I don't know. I really think that the most important thing you can do as a quaffle carrier is just be confident in yourself. No matter who you're up against, you know, I'm not a very big person, but I will take on the biggest person on the other team. I don't care. So just really trusting yourself and a pump fake. You know, a pump fake can take you so far in life.
For sure.
I think Jeff might have forgotten he was muted.
Yeah, I think you're on mute.
He was trying to ask a question. He was doing his best.
Oh my goodness, I'm really bad at technology. I have a follow-up because I think Nick is absolutely right that you're not giving yourself enough credit. That there was a play towards the end of Game 3 where you're at the back behind the hoops, and you go one way, you go the other, pump fake one time, pump fake another, and then you create the opportunity, I think, for Jay to finish. Do you remember that play? And it felt like a momentum shift for me.
I think that was the play where I did all that work and then I ripped it and I missed and made Matt chase it all the way to our keeper zone, and then they made something happen. But
there you go.
You know, shooters gotta shoot. I will say that forever. Shout out to Tad.
Kept the play alive.
Yeah. That's all I have to say, really. Just trust yourself. That's what I tell all my female chasers. Sorry.
No, it's very, very important advice. So kind of coming out of the series and looking ahead, what's the general mentality? You know, you guys get the sweep, maybe not exactly the way you wanted it, but you know, what are kind of team expectations kind of going to the championship, knowing that you're a young team, but also a team with obviously a ton of talent on it?
You know, we've made it to the semis every year on Soldados, and it's nice to make there. We'd like to go all the way. We have some things to work on, and we're going to try our hardest, and everyone has been working really hard all season. We've been meshing, I think, the Texas State and UTSA family together really well. So I'd say my heart says semis, but I'd like to win, awesome. As you know.
So at this point, it's sealed up. You guys are either playing Rochester or Minneapolis, two teams that I don't think you've personally ever played. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, yep. I don't think we played either of them ever.
Awesome. Have you had a chance to look into either, or just by knowing the players that are on either, is there a team you're more excited or hoping to play?
Well, just based on last year when Minneapolis didn't pick us, pick us. Pull up. We'd love to play y'all.
Awesome.
I think that would be a fun game for us.
I honestly think it's a game that would be a fun for a lot of us. I think we're all very much looking forward to it. Well, Mel, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Best of luck at the championships. We're looking forward to seeing you. Looking forward to you continuing to shoot, pass, and break defenses down. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks for having me on. Have a good night, y'all.
Alrighty, so now we'll kind of go back to last week's South Super Series, which Austin swept 6-0 to officially clinch the South Division, and Kansas City finished 3-3, which put them into that forced third place spot. Of course, even though they swept San Antonio, their losses to League City basically kept them out of that second place spot that they had the inside track to. And then New Orleans goes 0-6, but as we mentioned, by virtue of this week's result, did grab the fourth spot and is making their first MLQ championship appearance since, I believe, 2016. It might have been 2017. I apologize if I'm wrong. But So let's start with the New Orleans team, since it's been so long since we've seen them playing on the national level. Sorry, that came off way meaner than I meant it. I'm looking forward to it. Nick, about this is a New Orleans team where we've been talking about the same names for so long. What about this New Orleans team is different than the other ones?
I think they're just a more composed team. I think we're seeing what Russell Brian Cassio is doing for this team as a non-playing coach. This is a team that we talked about the names. We talked about a lot of them last year that I've sort of added into this year and grown. But I think really it's a team that's just composed and focused and has a plan for each game. And that's something that is a huge credit to Russell Bryan and the whole rest of that coaching staff.
Yeah. Jack, obviously the strategy is something we've talked about a lot, but how about any players maybe that you think have made really big impacts on this team so far this year?
Yeah, for me, I think it's been Dylan DeLee. I mean, the other players on the roster have been there. They've been, scrapping through the South Division for years and giving close games, but not able to get over the hump and make championships. I think they've slotted DeLee into the starting chaser line this season, and he's been the key addition. I think he's allowed Charlton Trammell to get into more aggressive positions. DeLee is often kind of a more composed player who's providing an outlet for PJ Mitchell and Emily Thompson. He's just comfortable moving the ball, and then also in transition can just get you buckets. Just a super athletic player. Hoping to see him at champs with the Curse.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned offensive impact there, but ultimately, this New Orleans team is going to be the lowest scoring team by quaffle points per game at championships. That said, their defense has held up very strongly. Their defense clocks in their quaffle points against, even in the South Division, having to play like San Antonio and Austin, they clock in below Kansas City. And kind of comparative to what Charlotte did in the East, even with those Ottawa games where Charlotte obviously didn't give up very many goals. Nick, what is this New Orleans team doing defensively, strategically?
They're putting on a clinic, right? They don't have the most talent in this division by a long shot, but they're using every single ounce of it, and they're using it smartly. I mean, against League City, we saw a masterclass in defensive takeaways over and over again. This was a team that comes in with a plan, and I know I'm reiterating what I said earlier, but it applies just as much on the defensive end as anything. They study the film, they see what the other team does well, and they do everything in their power to take it away. I mean, we even saw it against San Antonio for a time being, where unless Miguel was getting out in transition, Miguel was not getting around to the correct spots to score from against this team.
Yeah. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see, if teams are ready to, counter something like that. Because ultimately, I mean, this New Orleans team, even though we mentioned maybe not the strongest South Division we've ever seen, only gets their wins over League City. Jack, do you think this team can find any wins in the play-in bracket?
I do. I definitely do. Their first round matchup is the Toronto Raiders. I think that's a very beatable team for the Curse. It's a matchup that they'll be excited about. And then anything can happen, later on in the play-in bracket. I think the Curse are a team, like you said, that are built around their defense. They're beaters. In a division where sometimes the beater game can lose track of the quaffle game a bit. They're pretty focused on staying with opposing cutters, drivers. Sarah Nealing, just so experienced, knows that you can't do that in games that matter. And I think the New Orleans core will be well served by that defense first kind of attitude at champs.
Yeah, I gotta say, looking at that matchup, I think New Orleans gets a pretty big edge in the beating game there, based on what we've seen from this Toronto squad. And when this team can have a beating edge like they did in League City, as Nick was highlighting, they can be stifling on defense, and they can catch snitches, as needed as well. Nick, how do you kind of foresee that Toronto matchup going?
Give me New Orleans all day in this. Toronto is a team that has proven it struggles to score points. This is not a team that, I mean, they do have a quaffle points for of, I think it's 125, but a lot of that is run up against the likes of Cleveland early in the season, right? They struggled against Rochester. They struggled against Indianapolis. They struggled against Detroit for a lot of that to play and to win. Where this team is winning is on snitch catches, for sure. I think is allowing them back into games and letting them hang into these games. And I think that the experience of New Orleans beating core, even if they're not necessarily going to catch the snitch, because I think that seeking, they do catch some snitches, but they're not the strongest seeking core out there. This beating core is not going to let Toronto get a lot of the easy looks that we've seen throughout this season. And it's one game.
Yeah. I think a big X factor would be, does Zach McDonald finally appear for Toronto, and what does he look like if he does? Because I think there was a good amount of time where he was the best beater in Canada, and if he comes up and does that, and is going toe to toe with them, they ultimately still have great size, great physicality, great drivers, and Michael Howard can also find some passing lanes. So. Yeah, it'll be a fun matchup, and it would be great to see New Orleans, get a win on their return to championship. But as we've highlighted, I think a lot, this play-in bracket is going to be absolutely brutal this year. Bringing us to one of the teams that's going to make this play-in bracket absolutely brutal, the third place team from the South Division, by name only, one could argue, the Kansas City Stampede. Nick or Jack, when I was watching beforehand, I verbalized this to you guys off screen. Like it's not a hot take, but when you watch this team, the full strength team, obviously they weren't full strength when they got swept by League City, and not in the missing a couple players way, in a missing your roster kind of way. When you watch them, they're just a good Quidditch team. What are you seeing out of this Kansas City team?
Yeah, the fundamentals are there. Head coach Adam Heald has drilled the basics of passing and movement, and that they involve all the players on their roster in the quaffle game. When beaters like Justin DeWick are in, that they're pretty coordinated, chasers and beaters that working together at the same time. So it's a job well done by the Stampede coaching staff, and it's just been really exciting to see the structure in place that has allowed a player like DME to just take a whole bunch of new steps as an offensive player. Has just elevated an otherworldly level this season.
Yeah, Nick, I don't think we need to relitigate just how incredible DME is. It was on display on ESPN for literally the whole world a couple days ago. But what other players on this team do you think are kind of taking those next steps and really improving and making this team the force it is?
We have to talk about Billy Quach playing off ball super effectively, a role he's never really been in going back to his Arkansas days. He was often a ball carrier for that team. And if we're talking about ball carriers that are playing off ball now, Adam Heald coming back from pseudo retirement to play on this crazy off ball role that we've never seen him play, and with the height he has and the confidence with the ball in his hands, getting all of these mismatches is a huge deal. I think in the quaffle game, that's your biggest things. I think we'll probably get to some of the seeking interest in a little bit.
For sure. Jack, one of I think the overall worries about this team wasn't necessarily the quaffle game, because again, we know it was coming there. It was, whether this beater game could hang. And I think that's one of the things that impressed me about the Austin game. And we're going to talk about Austin's beating core as well, maybe it not being as strong as we've seen in the past, but they definitely did not get played off the pitch by this Austin team. What are you seeing from the beaters on this squad?
Yeah, I think you're right. It was even, and that they've grown throughout the season, because there were some early season matchups where the Stampede seemed to struggle in the beater game. But I think what they've done well is rely on the speed of their chasers defensively. They're not the most physical team in terms of tackling, but when you have players like DME and Sena Morimoto on defense, they can cover a lot of ground, and it kind of looks. I mean, DME has a basketball background. It looks like one of those fearsome, like old Syracuse University men's basketball zones, where it's more effective than a traditional 2-2, just because of how far they can extend and just how quickly they can make up space. So the beaters, I think that allows them to sit back a little further and not take some of the risks, because they can count on their chasers to take some of the risks that many beaters otherwise you would be taking.
Yeah, and you could argue that was kind of how Creighton tried to play this year as well, just kind of using that ridiculous athleticism DME provides to kind of cover other holes in the game. Nick, what do you kind of see from the way that they've been able to get more out of their beating through their quaffle players?
It is so fun to watch this Creighton core play in a conservative defense, because it is so clear they don't want to, and the second they get a turnover, they are flying down the field. It is so fun to watch this team get out and get ready to explode and make plays off the fast break, even when so many other teams wouldn't make it a fast break. I don't know if it's a charted stat, but I would bet reasonable money that this team leads picked off passes throughout the division. And it's super fun to see players like DME, who, well, he's not Giannis, but he's looking like Giannis out there playing. I think he covers from half pitch to the hoops in 3 steps, which we haven't seen that in this league before. And it's super fun to watch players make this fast break opportunity a thing out of these 2-2 zones.
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of mentioned just like, one of the ways you can really help your beaters out, especially on the offensive side, is if you can win one-on-ones. Because once you win the one-on-one, unless someone happens to be in position to step to it, the beater has to step, and that gets them away from the hoops and makes them turn their head and makes them more beatable. And I think it's all that talent that really makes it, and the fact that this team can move the ball around so well. We saw a little bit of, I wouldn't call it maybe hero balling, but just DME being DME as kind of their offensive plan for earlier parts of the season. There was some really good ball movement in the Austin series, which I think that kind of, as we mentioned earlier, goes to Adam Heald, drilling this team into a new look. Nick, you said you wanted to mention the seeking. We had huge questions about this team seeking coming into the season. We kind of kept those questions going. It seems like Joe Goulet is starting to answer some of those questions. We always say, you can't teach size. Joe Goulet is a big seeker, and it seems like he's now starting to find some of the actual, technique behind it. What are you seeing out of him?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Goulet is a completely different seeker from when we being Tufts played Creighton at USQ Nationals. He is setting up more efficiently. He is, rather than just going in and trying to use his athleticism to force the issue against these snitches, he is setting up and using his athleticism to make the snitches make mistakes. We're seeing a lot of feint and then go the opposite way, which I can tell you is the snitch's worst nightmare a lot of the time because of how the tail moves back there. He is shooting the gap super effectively, and he's doing it quickly. This is no longer the reckless just run in and hope that this is the case. His beaters buy him a second, and he's making moves. And it's not necessarily reflected in their snitch catch percentage here. But again, you could talk about this. He had a catch on ESPN for all the world to see. And that form is pretty impressive at this point.
Yeah, I'll say that even when not on ESPN, there was a combined scrimmage series where it was just stitch on pitch practice between the national team and the DA, and Joe caught like 5 or 6 times in a row. It was a show that he put on. It was very, very impressive. It's clear how far he's coming in that regard. All these hype things aside, I would say my biggest concern remains this team's physicality on defense, because DME, for all the things he's so great about, he's not the most physical player. He's not going to be laying out giant hits. And a lot of times when Austin was pulling ahead, it's because Augie would just go through the entire defense untouched, or JJ would go through the entire defense untouched. And, all of the top teams, if this KC team wants to make a run at championships, all the top teams have that quality of player. So, Jack, what do you think KC could, hope? We kind of talked about this with San Antonio already, but what can they do to maybe kind of ease the issues they're kind of having in terms of defensive physicality?
Yeah, I think maybe they can look to a player like Sena Morimoto to step up and make hits. Showed physicality in the beating game during the Creighton season. Needs to translate that to the Quaffle game for Kansas City. So I think they have players on the roster who can hit, and we just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, because another area where you'd almost expect them to be very good at, given all their athleticism, is kind of stitch on pitch quaffle play, and they've actually kind of gotten beaten down in a lot of those scenarios. So hopefully they can kind of start to figure that out. Looking ahead, they will be waiting on the winner of Charlotte and Indy. Nick, how confident are you in this team's ability to comfortably make it to the quarterfinals?
Comfortably? Not very.
Okay.
It's possible. I think it definitely is. I think we just talked a huge amount about their physicality. Quincy Hildreth is not the player you want to see if you're struggling for physicality and snitch on pitch. Just plain and simple. The beaters of Charlotte are not the beaters you want to see in your first game of the day, especially if they've had a game to go. The beaters of Indy are not the team you want to see in your first day of the game, or first game of the day. I do think that it's going to be super interesting to see how this seeking pans out, though. We have Ryan Davis on Charlotte, right, who catches anything and everything under the sun when given the chance. But Indy has that question mark right around seeking that they've had this whole year. So I'm curious to see if they make it through, how they're going to play that situation. I think that they will play. They have the potential to blow out either of these teams going in, but if they stick around and stitch on pitch, I think it could be problematic for them.
Yeah. I will say, I think KC would be licking their chops at Charlotte's half-court offense. I do not think that team has the passing to break down just kind of the crazy athletic way that KC's been playing on the defensive side of the ball, and I think that could make things ugly. And Indy, the issue is when you're the underdog, which I think Indy would be the underdog against Kansas City, it's hard to be the underdog and not really have a seeking game because you really need those 35 points. And if you're ceding those 35 points to the favorite, things get really difficult. Jack, what do you think about KC's chances in the play-in bracket?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the Indy seeking game because their hopes, I feel, rest on a player who comes from the University of Kansas, Riley Andrews, who made his debut for the Intensity at MLQ North Division Championships, caught some snitches, looked good in multiple facets of the game. And more than anything else, Indianapolis is going to need him in the seeking game against Kansas City if they get to a matchup with the Stampede.
Yeah, that'll be a fun returning home moment for Riley. Not only as a Kansas player, but a very integral part of this Kansas City program as well for a number of years. Some of the stronger Kansas City teams we've seen in the past. So yeah, that would be a fun storyline. Gotta get that one down in the notebook for when we're calling the games on Saturday. Let's wrap up Kansas City and move on to the only undefeated team in our league, a team who basically cruised through the regular season so quietly that I feel like we've barely even spoken about them, the Austin Outlaws. Nick, let's start with the positives, and obviously there's going to be a lot of positives when you're 12-0. What do you like from what you've seen from this Austin team this year?
They're still just as dominant as ever on the snitch. That's a huge key factor. We talk about all of these winning snitch percentages of 8-4. Austin let one snitch get caught against them this entire season. I think that's a huge feather in their cap if we're talking about it. I think that's really important. And you want to talk about stifling defenses. This Austin team is the poster child for stifling defenses.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the reasons there's a number of reasons I feel like the Austin Cav domination has been called boring over time, but it seems so oppressive at times, and it's not because they've been so much better in the quaffle game for all of these years. You could argue that, especially through the last few years, they haven't been necessarily the best. Last year's Austin team, don't get me wrong, was an absolute force in all aspects, but it's this domination and snitch on pitch that makes it so hard for anybody to ever upset them. And obviously, even when they finally do go down at USQ championships this past spring, it's on quaffle points alone. Nobody ever catching the snitch in that game. Jack, on the offensive side, a player that we kind of hyped up a ton coming in the season, and it's kind of, I think, lived up to that, is JJ. What have you seen from him this year?
Yeah, it's been really cool because I think Josh Johnson has slid over into more of an off-ball role at times, which doesn't mean he's no longer passing and making good decisions with the ball, but it's put him into some more dangerous spaces. And I think he's kind of filled the hole left by a player like Andrew Axtell. Like he's not necessarily replaced like Augie Monroe, which we maybe always thought was his trajectory as a ball dominant player, but instead he's been using his physicality on the offensive end, his ability to break tackles, and operating on the wings, and just tearing through opposing defenses. So I think it's been exciting to watch his growth. Still a young player with many years of dominant Quidditch ahead of him. So just cool to see the evolution over the course of the season.
You want to talk about one-on-one players? Josh Johnson might be the ultimate one-on-one player in this league. I think there's very few people who can stay ahead of him. And the thing is that he is so efficient at passing just before the contact. You cannot play a mark when Josh Johnson is on the field. If you play a mark, you are going to get eaten alive. He has the floater shot from that 6-yard box. He has the pitch-perfect pass to the across hoop on either side of him. And he can just make people miss.
Yeah, you kind of stole my point there, which was going to be that we've seen all these East teams, toying with mark defenses. Like, oh, maybe this is like a wrinkle they can throw in. All you got to do is turn on ESPN, and you can see how bad of an idea it is to play mark defense against Josh Johnson. He is a literal cheat code for mark defense. His vision, his ability to find teammates. I mean, teammates. When he's playing with the DA, teammates he hasn't even played with for more than a few days, already has chemistry as though he's been playing with them forever. And I think, going to Jack's point, that's one of the benefits of kind of playing him off ball against zone defenses, because what we saw, and I think one of our worries coming into this season was, we saw at USQ that sometimes maybe he didn't have the solutions for zone defenses. And when you get him off ball, you get him cutting with motion. That zone defense doesn't have the structure that it had when he's just standing up top being like, oh, can I pass or can I shoot? And neither of those options is really open when you're just standing at the top of the 2-2. They've managed to find a way to put him in more dangerous positions. Jack, how about any other individuals on this team that you think specifically need to be highlighted for their performance so far this year?
Yeah, I mean, Erin McBride, like one of the best in the game right now. Just able to use her height and length around the hoops to finish, especially in snitch on pitch situations, kind of defensive breakdowns. Like, she's always there. She's going to be receiving the quaffle, getting into position to get passes from a player like JJ, and just have no doubt about putting them home. So she's just been so key for the Outlaws over the past 2 years.
Yeah. Nick, any other players you think are worth highlighting before we move maybe to some of our more concerns about this Austin team?
I think that if we're going to talk about players that have to be shouted out, Kaiser Polson has taken that step. That we're going to get to the questions about the Austin beating core in a second, but I don't think Kaiser is one of those questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and it's kind of been fun to watch his growth, right? Because he was beater 2 for a college team last fall, and then suddenly was, the best beater in college and national champion in college, and then DA, and then, probably the best beater on this Austin team now, with possibly the exception of Bailey Fields, who I think we're about to talk about. Not her poor play, but her potential lack of availability. Let's move over to talking about things we're worried about. And you mentioned, Nick, the beater game. Bailey Fields didn't play in the South Super Series, limited with Team USA this past week. So seems questionable whether she'd be available. Do you think this is a championship-winning beating core without her?
I think it's tough. I think you look at those beating cores that exist around the league elsewhere. You look at the Danielle Williams-Kat Hayworth pair coming out of San Antonio. You look at the depth that is this insane Boston beating core. I mean, and that's a possible quarterfinal matchup for them. We won't know until this weekend, but that's a team that I think you're going to see. This team's going to have to get creative at championships. This is a team that has so often relied on being able to at least play to parity in the beating game. We saw it last year in the semifinals against Boston, where really the only thing that kept Boston in that game was a complete just blackout snitch on pitch performance in game one that let them get back in with the catch. And I think that this team is one that might not be able to play to parity as effectively with some of these other beating cores. And given their slow, methodical style, that could be a problem.
Yeah. Along with Kaiser, I think a player we talked a lot coming into the season was Jack Wang, also coming from the UT program. And, and this is uncommon for a young beater, but it still feels like he's very mercurial, where, you can get your highs and you can get your lows. But, there's not a lot of room for mercurialness in MLQ semifinals and finals. I was just watching game 3 a little bit before this of Kansas City Austin, and there's an exchange he has with Vincent Reyes of Kansas City where the ball, I forget how it ended up here, but Jack has a ball in hand on defense. Vincent Reyes' ball is basically at his feet, needs to try to go down for it. Jack's only a few feet away, and he kind of zips one so hard, Reyes is able to jump over it. Jack's ball is now all the way back in KC's area, completely out of defensive play. Reyes can now just pick his ball up. There were cleaner ways to kind of mitigate that situation. But it's just plays like that. It's nothing new. It's something we've kind of seen from his game when the highs are high. I mean, obviously that USQ College Championship, he absolutely took that game over with help from Kaiser as well. But they're going to need a really strong performance out of him, and obviously out of Kaiser as well. Out of Casey Beavers, if they decide to go that route of having her play in the beating game, though, she's also, I think, a very major contributor for this team in the quaffle game, and probably where I would expect to see her. Jack, what do you think about the ability for this team's beaters to kind of get them across the finish line?
Yeah, it's tough because, like you mentioned, you're potentially taking talent out of the chaser game in Casey Beavers or Casey Irwin if you need them in the beating game. Beavers played heavy minutes in the USQ college final with Wang and Polson, and can fill that role. I think at the MLQ level too, for sure. But you're just potentially really going to be missing a player like Bailey Fields if she can't play, because she's played with mercurial hyper aggressive beaters before. She just won a club national championship with one in Danielle Williams, of course, and knows how to play that role. So I think it's definitely something to watch ahead of championships.
Yeah. Nick, before we wrap on Austin, any other concerns you have about this team?
I know we talked about like JJ playing off ball against 2-2s and hoop zones and things, but I still don't think this team is using, so far, we'll see what they do at championship, but using the most efficient ways to break these down. And I think that's something that we saw in the Kansas City game is that they struggle against teams with height at the hoops around this. There was a lot of shot blocking by the longer KC defenders. And the South Division as a whole is not necessarily a division which we would say is bereft with tall keepers right now. But when you have the flexibility of an Ian Skura, of a Ryan Fenning around those hoops, going in Tyler Trudeau with that height, because their target is often that top hoop. And I'm curious to see what happens there. I'm also curious to see what happens if teams break out hoop zones with hyper-conservative beaters against them, how that beating core tends to break that down and allow for opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, ultimately, I think when it comes down to it, what we know about this team is they can play smart, they can play patient, they can probably play any team to parity, and they can catch snitches. And someone's going to have to come and take it from them, because that is a recipe for a team of this level winning a lot of games. So it'll be interesting to see how things break down. As we said, they might not have the easiest road to another championship, being the first team to ever win 4 championships. Boston, of course, could be that first team as well if they were to win this season. That is going to do it for this episode of MLQ Replay. Quiet week this week here in the MLQ world. We do have the completion of Washington-Boston, which is probably the biggest 10 minutes in the history of Quidditch. As a singular asset, obviously not the biggest game ever, but for one thing that's being hyped up as 10 minutes of play. Boston wins, they win the division. Boston loses, they finish third. Washington wins, they finish second in the division and get to go straight to the quarterfinals. They lose, they're in third. And New York, who is the most local team to the series, which is being played in New Jersey, I think, from what I've heard, a bunch of them are going to come out to watch it, wins the division title if Washington wins the game. So absolutely crazy stakes for 10 minutes of Quidditch. It's going to be fun. And then on Monday, right here on MLQ Replay, Alex O'Banner will be on the program for representing Minneapolis to make the decision of who they will play. Will it be San Antonio, or will it be the second place team in the East? Whoever that ends up being, we still have time to decide. And then, of course, MLQ Championship the week after that, Saturday and Sunday, with Take Back the Pitch on Monday. I think you can probably tell this is the most hyped I've been for MLQ Championship in a long time. Every game is going to be absolutely interesting. There's so many good teams going and so much parity around the league. So it's going to be a fun one. We thank you guys, as always, for watching. We hope you have a good week, and we'll catch you next week with Obi making some really big decisions right on screen. Have a good night and take care.